Hey everybody, I'm Sean C. Davis, developer experience engineer over at StackBit, and I'm excited to be joined by Jeff Escalante today. We're here to answer one very specific question and hopefully a lot of residual questions around it. But the main question is what makes Next.js a good fit for enterprise companies? So first off, Jeff, thanks for being here.
Of course, happy to be here as always.
I think probably a good place to start, just for folks who don't know you, is to set the stage of maybe just tell us like the experience you have around Next.js, kind of help contextualize this conversation.
Sure, yeah, of course. I definitely wanted to talk through that anyway, just because I feel like there's some potential for implied bias, but I want to assure you all that there is not really any bias. I'm just trying to help people make the right choices for them. I won't reach back too far in my career, but my last two jobs, the 2 jobs back, I worked at HashiCorp. I was there for about 4 years. And I was a somewhat early adopter of Next.js, not the earliest, but I was in the earlier phases, and we used it at HashiCorp to help kind of scale out a set of like 15 to 20 or so like websites, from documentation to marketing sites to like a learning and guides app to conference websites. Like a whole range of public websites that a large company produces was my team at HashiCorp's kind of like purview. And Next.js is what we picked up for that because of its perceived flexibility and scalability. And it worked out really well over my time at HashiCorp, which is about 4 years. And so that's largely what I'm here to kind of like reflect on, is like that experience, why we made the choice, how it worked for us, what were the pluses and minuses. And, HashiCorp, I was there from about 200 employees through 2,500 plus and an IPO. So I definitely saw it through a pretty dramatic period of scale and a transition from like relative startup into enterprise. After that, and for the last year, I was over at Vercel as the engineering manager for the Next.js team directly, which was awesome. Really great opportunity that I'm super grateful for. And I was much more on the inside track there. I had worked with the Next.js team. I had made some contributions to Next.js during my time at HashiCorp, but obviously when you're directly on the team, it's a whole different like level of integration. So that was really cool. And I am no longer in that position, so I don't have any, I mean, I would like to tell you that I didn't even when I was in that position, because I'm an honest person, but you would have no incentive to believe me now that I'm actually not. I hope that you have more of an incentive to believe that I'm, certainly not being paid off by anybody. I don't have any like particular biases. I just am talking to something that I've used a decent amount that I know about, and hopefully it'll be helpful for everybody.
And I can
currently I'm
right that.
I'm on paternity. I'm on independent paternity leave, and I'm looking to kind of start in a new role sometime around May, and I'm interviewing now. So if you see this and you want to work with me or have me come work at your company, let me know.
All right. Love that. Okay. So it's, yeah, I think that kind of contextualizing this around your time at HashiCorp would be really effective. So maybe start with, did you, when you first started at HashiCorp, were you using something other than Next.js?
Yes. So when I came into the company, there was like kind of a constellation of websites that were built on mostly a technology called Middleman. And for anyone not familiar with Middleman, which is probably most people, Middleman was like the static site generator version of Ruby on Rails. So it was, you would write templates in Ruby, and it used Rails asset pipeline, and it was kind of just like as close of an approximation of like Rails, except instead of generating like a website intended to be dynamically rendered off a server, it generated a folder full of HTML files when you ran a generation command. And so that was what we came into. The version of Middleman that was being used was a couple of years out of date. So it definitely needed a lot of work, regardless of whether we changed frameworks or not. Like quite a lot of work. It was like several breaking versions behind. And the question was really like moving forward into the company's future, which at that point we could kind of tell was going to be a period of like very fast growth and scale. What is a tool that we can, maybe it's Middleman, maybe it's not, but like the big question for us as a team that was forming at that early phase was what technology can we put in place that we'll be able to grow with, right? We don't want it to be too dramatic, right? We don't want to go from a static site generator to like an enormously complex like enterprise architecture, even though we knew we would probably need something like that down the road as the company grew. Like that's too harsh of a transition. It's too big of a change. It's not something that you come into a company and you're like, we're going to do this. It's just not a good idea for many reasons, like people dynamics related and also just purely like technology related. I mean, when you're stepping into something new, you want to do it bit by bit, gently, instead of doing it too dramatically. So this was a kind of a weird requirement set of like, we wanted something that we could use effectively as a static site generator and use the same kind of like patterns and use the same type of hosting and the whole rest of the setup for deploying and everything as there already was with Middleman. But we wanted it to be able to like scale up very dramatically over time. And I was working in the marketing department at that time, which I think was honestly great rather than engineering. Engineering was focused on like building HashiCorp's tools, whereas HashiCorp's websites were kind of like a supplement to engineering, and that we worked with engineering a lot because there were documentation and there was learning and everything else like that. But a lot of the websites were like the company website, hashicorp.com is one of our things, the conference website. And so we ended up being placed under marketing, even though there was some back and forth at various times because we were an engineering team of whether we should actually be moved under engineering. But regardless, the point I was trying to make here is that we knew that things were going to grow and they were going to scale a lot. And we had these ideas about how we can do marketing that were like very ambitious, let's put it that way. And the general gist of the idea, and this is not a new or like or fantastical idea, but it is ambitious for a startup, is that like when you show up at one of the company's web properties where you engage with the company in any way, there's a record of that somewhere and we have data about it. So like, let's say somebody comes into the company's website on hashicorp.com and they're interested in one of HashiCorp's products, Terraform. And so they go to a couple of pages related to Terraform and they start reading about it. And then, they close the tab and they end up coming back to the website later. In theory, we could show everybody the same page, say, here's HashiCorp, like go find your stuff. But also we already know something about that person, right? We know that they're interested in HashiCorp. Well, we know that for sure. We know that they're interested in Terraform. And so what you could do is you could maybe change around the way that the page is rendered to perhaps emphasize Terraform a little bit more since we know that they're interested in it, or prioritize like new features and releases to Terraform because we already know some information about the user. And that leads you very quickly away from static generation and towards dynamic generation, because instead of just showing everyone the same page, we have somebody show up and we go through their history of the ways that they've interacted with the company. And based on that, we decide what they're most likely to want to see, right? And there's a second component to that too, which is like, I'm sure this is different for every company, but like there tended to be a purchasing pattern at HashiCorp. HashiCorp has multiple different products, but people tended to start with one product and then move to the next product and move to the next product and move to the next product. And we had seen enough over time at the company that like this is a pretty consistent pattern. And so there's even more that you could do from a personalization standpoint there, which is like, if you are looking into like Terraform tended to be like the entry point for HashiCorp. Like most people would start using and or buying Terraform. And then they would move towards Vault, right? So like if we see you checking out Vault, then we might be able to figure out that like, okay, perhaps you have a specific interest in Vault, but perhaps you also already are using Terraform, right? And the more information we collect about how people are coming to our website, like maybe you signed up for our email list. And so now we know your email and we know that you clicked through from this thing on that email, right? This is not like devious like advertising or like, like privacy invading stuff by any means. It's just trying to make this website more useful for you, right? Like companies have a lot of different offerings. It can be very confusing. There's different personas, right? There's a developer, or there's like someone who's not a developer coming to the website to check out the offerings. And those two audiences might want to see different types of things. And so even at this early stage, the way we were talking within marketing was like, we would like to target having a more advanced system like this, a system that uses patterns of each user's like behavior on HashiCorp's properties and that user's like relationship with HashiCorp in order to try to put in front of them what they want to see and what's useful and what's relevant to them. And then that also has the benefit for the company in theory of making it more likely for them to engage with the company, for them to use the company's products, and ultimately for them to buy the company's products. And so having that kind of like scheme in our brains, but being ultimately very, very far from actually having it implemented, we still wanted to build with that in mind. And we knew that a static site generator just wouldn't do the trick for us, right? I mean, these are public facing websites, which meant that bounce rate was a real thing, performance was a real thing, SEO was a real thing. And so we couldn't just ship a big empty page with a bundle of client-side JavaScript and have them figure out who the user is and decide on the client side because it would be too slow. So we needed to have the server rendering these things, and we needed the server to get the request, figure out who you are, build the page based on that, and then send back the result. And what we were looking for, basically, this is a very long answer, but I'm hoping this is
it's all right. I'm letting you go. Keep going.
Right now. What we're looking for is a tool that we could put in place that wasn't too dramatically complex or different from the static site generator that we had, so that we could take an incremental step towards this, but that we could use that same tool to do something as advanced as this scheme that I'm talking about, with like figuring out who the person is and putting relevant information in front of them down the road when we get to that point where that's what we want to do. And it was really hard to find a tool that would do both of those things. It was very easy to find a tool that would do one or the other and make a decision where you're like, when we get to that point, we'll wipe out this one and we'll write a whole new app. But we really wanted to avoid that wipe out the whole thing and write a new app thing. And Next.js was the closest thing we found to something that would be able to render a static site and also render a dynamic pages on a per page basis, right? Because we don't want every page to be dynamically rendered. Some pages, we just want to show everyone the same thing, right? If it's a landing page, show them the same thing. That was the closest option we could find. And so that was kind of like why we started ending up going down the road of Next.js, which is like not even very technical reason, is mostly like a business driven reason. But okay, that's all. I'll stop talking.
that makes sense. Yeah, several questions coming out of there. One is, you early on in the answer, you mentioned that you said, I wouldn't want to shift us from middleman to like some immediately enterprise only solution, and there's politics involved.
Of course.
But beyond the politics, is there a technological reason why you wouldn't make that? Like, why wouldn't you go to, say, a Rails, having been with middleman already?
Well, I mean, it's just more than you need for a really long time, right? So like going straight to something like Rails is like it's like paying a cost now, a large cost now, for something that you don't actually need right now, in exchange for not having to do that big rewrite if and when you get to the point of scale. And especially for startups, like not every startup gets to that point, right? And like it's often very, very competitive of a landscape of like, you need to move fast, you need to beat your competition. And so like taking on the extra weight of working with tooling that's more complicated than you need it to be and has a lot more extra stuff that it can do that you're not doing with it right now, could even spell out like the end of your startup, right? If you had a competitor who just went, bam, I'm just going to do a static site and that's it. We're going to get off the ground. We're going to build our business. And they put you out of business before you even get to the point where you're able to leverage your high scale capabilities that you've been preparing for day one. So it's this very fraught problem where it's like, there's kind of this space where you had to be put between a rock and a hard place as a startup, where you can choose tools that fit your needs now and allow you to move fast with little to no overhead, but that you guaranteed will hit this like full stop point where you need to wipe out the whole thing and do a rewrite, which is expensive. It stalls your growth. It's painful, right? Or you carry the weight of a big complex enterprise tool for God knows how long, which slows down your development pace and makes things more difficult to deal with at the beginning, might put you out of business before you even get there, for the potential benefit of not having to do that rewrite at some point. And that is a very painful thing to have to reckon with for a company getting started. And so a tool that can kind of sit in the middle of those things, like it's not super complicated for enterprise, it's not super simple. Right? There's much simpler tools for building static websites in Next.js. Absolutely there. But there's kind of this little sweet spot in the middle there that it hit for us, where it was like, it's simple enough that it doesn't carry so much weight that we feel like it's going to bog us down, but it also gives us enough of a bet on future growth and being able to handle that future growth that it made sense.
Yeah, so the HashiCorp story, it makes a lot of sense. It feels like a perfect use case for Next.js, but also these companies that aren't in startup mode anymore and pure enterprise mode are adopting it. I don't have a good example. I feel like was on maybe the Nike site last week, but just like these huge companies that are using Next.js. And so you might not have that direct experience, but why do you think it is also a good fit for someone who doesn't have to consider the growth, but is already at enterprise scale?
Fair question. Good question. I think that the reason in those cases, and like you said, like, this is not what my own use case directly was, so this is just conjecture. But I think the reasoning there is mostly, I think there are probably a couple of factors. Okay, let's go through them one by one. I think one of the draws is React, right? React was a tool for, and is a tool for building like responsive, like reactive, I suppose, user interfaces that was built by Facebook for Facebook. And Facebook is a huge, very, very interactive, very complicated app. I don't know how you gauge the metrics of who's the most complicated app and the highest scale app on the internet. But regardless of how you do it, I'm sure Facebook is up there in the top 5 or the top 10 because it's just massive, right? And there's a ton going on there. And so I think that when companies are looking to build large, high-scale, complex apps, React is an attractive option to them for that reason, because it was something that Facebook made a bet on. It worked out really well for them. They doubled down on, they continue to double down on. And that's a really good sign if you are also trying to build a high-scale, complex app, is to use a tool that somebody else very successfully used to build a high-scale, complex app, right? And so I think that React alone is a big draw. And then to add to that, right, the ecosystem around React, the popularity around React, the ease of hiring React developers just, sweetens the deal more and more and more, right? Because if you're a large company, you're looking to hire a lot of people, you're looking to build large teams and take on ambitious projects. And so like, if you're trying to make a bet on a technology, you want to make a bet on a technology that's popular, that's stable, and that has as wide of a base of developers in the market who have an interest in working with it and expertise in working with it as possible. As much as that's like not exactly the reason you want to be using for making technical choices, and it's not a technical reason, like it still can't be discounted as a business. And I don't think that you can really totally separate out technical decisions and business decisions unless you want to be putting yourself in a world of pain. To be honest, right? I mean, they go hand in hand. And so you can't, you can't divide them that much. You really have to consider both of those factors. And then the road leading to Next.js, right, is that if you're using if you're using pure React, React on its own is a client-only rendering tool. If you want to server render React, you kind of have to set up a few more like things. And I remember in the early days of server rendering, Facebook used it. And I remember Airbnb like made a big bet on it, and they started writing blogs about it early. And those were both like big, complex, high scale apps. But server rendering outside of those environments was like not super accessible because it was really complicated to set up, and the overhead to getting it set up was so high that it didn't really feel worth doing for the benefits of like the performance increases, unless you had enough scale that those benefits paid off for you, I guess. And so when you have a tool like Next.js come out that kind of like takes care of the whole server rendering thing and shoves it under the hood and says like, you can just use this and it will give you server rendering, it makes that more of an attractive option. And if you're a large company, server rendering is a very attractive thing for multiple reasons, right? One is that it increases performance. And I'm actually not sure there are any other reasons. I mean, when you're a big company, performance is everything, right? And unless your app is completely behind a login, if you have any pages that are public or any pages that you want to make public in the future, potentially, which I would say is probably the case for almost all large applications, right? At least something might be public. It's a user profile, it's a share link, something like that. Then you don't want to be shipping an empty page with a giant JavaScript bundle because, you know, data has showed very consistently over time that's going to get you a slower page render. And data has also showed consistently over time that slower page render leads to less revenue for your company because people are distracted, they're on the go, they're using a phone, you know, a low-end Android phone on 3G. It takes 10, 15 seconds to load. They get distracted by something else. They put their phone away. And so for a smaller operation, like it probably doesn't really matter that much is the truth, right? Like, you know, you don't have the scale where it's worth you putting $1 million into shaving a half a second off your page load time. You know, that would be probably a large loss for you as a startup, putting $1 million into saving a half second. But for a company like Walmart or like Facebook or like Target or something, like that's a no-brainer. I would put $1 million into shaving a half second off their page load time because their data has shown that they will make more than $1 million based off of that change, right? And so, of course, you would make that decision.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, appreciate all this. There's one more question I want to ask before we wrap, and it's maybe taking us out of the context a little bit, but I feel like it's related and probably a good place to wrap. And that is that. So you used Next.js kind of in the earlier days, and that pattern. They were really one of the first to establish that pattern of the hybrid rendering model within the same framework.
Static.
And that was, yes, hugely, hugely influential. And now it seems like all these other frameworks have either added in the thing that they weren't doing, or new frameworks are coming out that are offering that same type of rendering model or the choice. But anyways, lots of them on the scene today. So if you had to go through this process again today, is there a reason why you might go right back to Next, or do you feel like the ecosystem is such that you have more to choose from based on some other criteria?
You definitely have more to choose from, and that's a wonderful thing. The question, if you are trying to build a company, is what is going to be most beneficial for your company, right? And so you might be able to find another framework that delivers roughly the same package of benefits as Next.js delivers. In fact, I'm sure you'd be able to find that. I'm sure you'd be able to find multiple of them. But then the question becomes like, what is the market share? You know, and if you look at the charts, like, you know that Next.js has been around for a long time. It has a super, like, you've seen the state of JavaScript surveys and like the usage numbers. It has super high usage. It has an entire company funding it with like a large team of developers working on it full time. And it's based on React, which is kind of in the same boat. You know, it's been dominant for a super long time. It's used by really, really large companies. It's been proven and battle tested at scale over and over and over. And I think it comes back to a classic kind of like question that's not just for choosing web frameworks, but it's for choosing any type of technology at a company, which is like, do you want to use a kind of like industry standard like option that feels stable and secure, or do you want to make a bet on something else? And there are certainly times where you should make a bet on something else, but I feel like those times usually come along with like some unique circumstance at your company. Like, for example, if you have a lot of developers who are really interested in working with this technology at your company, that's different. That might be a good reason to do it. If you have a very unique use case that requires some type of thing that Next.js is not very strong at, but that some other framework is super strong at, you might want to choose a more specialized framework for that reason. If you're sure that you're not going to scale up, which is the case for many businesses. If you open a bakery in your town, like, and your ambition is not to open a national chain, then scalability is probably not the most important thing for you anymore, right? And so, going with a framework whose strength is like scalability is like, that suddenly doesn't become important to you anymore, and now that opens up the door a little more. Or if you find some like very specific metric that's really important to you that this alternative framework like beats out something like Next.js on, then I think that that's important too, right? If you write a little demo app that does the type of thing you're trying to do in 2 or 3 different frameworks, and one of them is like absurdly faster to load, or like your development team likes the experience of writing it way, way more, like, I think those are totally valid reasons to choose something else. But I mean, the truth is, choose boring technology is often like it's a commonly cited phrase, and there's some good wisdom behind it. It's like,
Yep.
you should if you want to spend focus your time and effort on making bold bets and taking big risks, I would probably do that with some other aspect of the company, like the company's product or some new innovative feature, rather than the base upon which you build things. Because unless there's a really dramatic difference, it's unlikely that base upon which you build things is going to be the differentiating factor between your company and your competitor, right? It's just kind of just an implementation detail.
Yes, absolutely. Great way to end it and wrap it all up. Appreciate the time as always. I feel like you're really great at navigating these questions that I throw at you
Thank
kind of
you.
out of nowhere. So thanks, Jeff. Yeah, this has been great. I feel like you nailed the questions, and we and we'll do this again soon. Yeah.
All right. Looking forward to it.
All right.